What I hope to achieve at the end of this video is drive your consciousness to the fact that there are multiple alternatives. I mean, beyond how the real estate market has made us to perceive housing, has made us to perceive development. Yes, we know that things are expensive, things are not affordable. However, there are workarounds that we can use to make access to housing more reachable. And this is off the back or off the understanding that land is the biggest hurdle. Land is the number one barrier that keeps a lot of us away or locked out of affordable housing. Having land is like the key to unlocking affordable housing, to unlocking access to housing. And so what I want to do, the goal for me today is drive your consciousness to the reality, to the amount of alternatives, the amount of possibility with being creative with land ownership, being creative with how we use land, how we develop land, how we acquire land. Because for a fact, the fact is we cannot change the price of land. We can't miraculously or just force government or ask government to force landowners to sell at particular prices or to enforce a price cut. What we can do, however, is this workarounds, is be creative with how we own land, with how we title, with how we transfer, how we develop. And this has become rather compulsory for Lagos and Abuja especially, considering that the cost of land now in these cities is almost 4 times, 3 times whatever you're going to build on it. So it makes sense that if we want to make housing affordable, if we want to create access to housing, at least in the present day Nigeria, our focus should be on how to make land ownership, how to make access to land ownership easier and less burdensome. And I'm sure that if you also paid attention that last year, the government under the Renewed Hope Housing Initiative did a different price regimen for Lagos and Abuja, because even though the government was subsidizing the cost of housing, the cost of land for every other city, for Lagos and Abuja, it was such that the government itself could not subsidize the cost of land. Remember, according to our Land Use Act, the land belongs to the government. However, in the economic sense of things, government could not offset the cost of the difference in the cost of land between Abuja and Lagos and the other states enough to make everything, to make land, to make its housing sell at the same price across all the states. So if the FG can feel it and not manage, that tells us how important it is that for these cities, the hopes of regular people, of salary earners, for small business owners, for average income earners who just need a decent roof over their head is almost close to zero. And that is why, even though there are unlimited opportunities, there are a lot of creative ways that we can approach this one. Because of time, I will only just brush through, just to help you know, just to help you understand that yes, beyond how the real estate market has presented housing, has presented land acquisition, has presented titling, documentation to us, there are more flexible, more convenient, even less burdensome ways that we can acquire land, that we can transfer title, that we can develop housing and make it easier for us. And the peculiarity about these three is they intentionally, they in their core, in their essence, they protect the interest of the masses. They protect the middle income, the low income, the average income earners from price fluctuation, from speculation, from the profit-making drive that is peculiar to the real estate market and which has driven the cost of housing higher beyond what average people can afford. And I think I should start from breaking down what the implication of this real estate model has been, the implication of how the real estate market as it is today has influenced and affected and has changed and even worsened what the definition of housing is, what the definition of affordable housing should be. So let me paint you a picture. And yes, it may be a little bit dramatic, but I'm sure you're going to get the point that I'm trying to make. So the cost of housing in Lagos and Abuja is a classic case of high demand, low supply. Population of people and the demand for housing is higher than the number of housing. And so based on that alone, one would assume that as long as we can increase the supply and build more housing, then the supply will increase and the price of housing will come down. But if it was that simple, why then do we have a lot of empty houses just locked up there in this same Lagos and Abuja? But let's keep that aside for a moment, because I'm sure you must have also heard the theory that anyone or anybody that can solve the supply of housing in Lagos at the price point that the people are willing and are ready to pay for such person will fall into money and become an overnight success. And interestingly, everyone that had this and also believed this theory, from private individuals to developers, companies to even corporate organizations, everybody is running to the city outskirts to validate this theory. And the rationale is the cost of land in the city center is expensive. So if you want to bring down our cost of production of housing, let's go to the city outskirts where the cost of land, where the price of land is still affordable, still within range. And by the time we had the cost of production, the cost of cement, the cost of block, the cost of building, the cost of salaries to that cost of land, the resulting price, the total price, will still be affordable for average citizens. But then we all also forgot that the cost of land does not single-handedly determine the price of housing. And so before developers can even sell these buildings that they've built in the outskirts, they also need to provide infrastructure. They build roads, electricity, drainage, water, all created from scratch. And by the time you then add the cost of all these inputs, these additional inputs, these amenities and infrastructure into the cost of housing, to the cost of land, into the cost of production, then the price of housing comes to almost the same level as the city center, which brings us right back to the same problem that we were running from. So, in present day Nigeria, based on the level of infrastructure development, based on the level of economic development, whether in the city outskirts or in the city center, the cost of housing still almost evens out. And ironically, the interesting part of it is the cost that renters or buyers now pay for those outskirts in the long run then becomes higher than if they had stayed in the city center. Because yes, land is what makes the difference. But if, like I've stated, the difference in the city center and the outskirts is infrastructure, then first of all, maybe we should stop running to the outskirts where we still end up providing infrastructure for ourselves, because beyond just paying the full rent or the mortgage or the full cash payment for such housing, buyers and renters end up paying more in high cost of transportation, in health crisis, in reduced productivity, in long hours wasted in traffic, with stress and a lot of health crisis, health issues. All because the market made us believe that as long as we can reduce the cost of land, everything would be alright. I wish there was a mathematical way that we could calculate the cost, the real cost of all this traffic, productive lost time, and sitting in traffic for a long time. But the point is, as we know that cities evolve, and arguably we could say Lagos is in its third evolution, and Abuja in its second, and both of them are already unaffordable. And of course we could say, key into the new Lagos, key into the future Abuja, buy now, build later. Yes, that makes sense for somebody who is seeking investment. But what does that mean for somebody who truly needs the stability of affordable housing today, to survive today, to even be productive and live well today? Yes, it makes sense for investment. But for this kind of people, it does not make economic logic. So, if building in the city outskirts does not make any difference in the long run for the cost of housing, why then don't we just find ways to make the city center, where there are infrastructure, amenities, why can't we just find ways to make that city center work for everyone? Because as long as we keep planting housing first before infrastructure, as long as we keep using housing to expand the outskirts before infrastructure comes, we will never stop playing catch up. And that's because in most of the cases where the market is leading does not align with where government wants to go. And because of that misalignment, people are just there building housing, building roads, providing electricity for them, and government is collecting tax without giving anything back in return. So if that were the case, why don't we find creative ways to help the middle class and the low class, the average Nigerians, to access property ownership and housing within the already developed prime locations of the city, where infrastructure is already existing, where they can live in close proximity to where they work, and even to the quality of life that they anticipate for themselves, and close to the source of their livelihood. And in there is the point and purpose of these three methods, these three land acquisition and development approach, is to protect the average masses, to protect regular people from these speculative real estate practices. And even though, if I may add, that this protection is supposed to be the responsibility of the government. However, if there is anything that we've seen with recent development, is that even the government itself is more interested in the positive gains of the speculative real estate market, even though it is at the expense of the regular masses, at the expense of every other person. as long as the state is making its revenue and also making money off the profit of this real estate development, all that is happening simply points to the fact that this is only going to get worse. And what makes this protection, this need for protection, even more urgent is the fact that if has projected that by 2050, which is just 24 years' time, the population of Africa, the population of Lagos is going to double. Now, if presently at between 20 to 25 million population, Lagos is already unaffordable. And considering the fact that the volume of land, the area of land is not going to increase, and there are no indications that the level of economic development or the level of income is also going to be any different from what it is now. So, if decent accommodation is already cut throat at the moment, what will be the case in 25 years' time, where the population has doubled, development has increased, the cost of land has increased, but income still remains the same? What will be the case? What will be the lot for the middle income earners, for the salary earners, for small business owners, and people who their parents did not leave them large inheritance, if we don't start looking out for ourselves to protect our own interest and the interest of our future generations from the effect of these speculative, profit-focused real estate development models? And talking about real estate development models, I think it's important that I had also, because I remember I was having a conversation with a colleague who jokingly said that for us to make people pay attention to these housing issues, that he believes or he thinks that it is time that we start labeling everything as real estate. And as funny as that sounds, it just captures the reality that seems to be the only thing that we now all care about, from government to private individuals, organizations, and even worse, people who are still in hustle mode, people who are still in survivor mode. The only thing we all care about is anything with a real estate label. Meanwhile, a lot of us, many people cannot even afford basic rent yet. Which brings me to the danger of this fast outward expansion that the real estate market is pushing the city to and calling it growth. The implication of this fast outward expansion and how it's becoming technically and economically impossible for average citizens, for regular people, to afford to either buy, develop, or even rent in this same city outskirts. Because now our cities have been sold to the highest bidder, leaving low-income residents with nowhere to go, with no other alternatives, with no other options. The first step towards protecting average citizens is to first acknowledge that, yes, we know that it's easy to monetize. We agree that it's easy to make money off the current model that our real estate market is running on. However, if we continue like this, we will lock out average masses from owning land, from owning a piece of property. Because what we would have effectively done is just ensure that only the haves, only the rich can have access to real estate investment, can have access to real estate opportunities, to wealth creation, to wealth retention. So if we must take this seriously, like my colleague said, about taking the issues of housing with the seriousness of real estate, of the core real estate market, of real estate investment, then I guess the best way to look at this protection, to look at this protection of the middle income, of the low income class, to be able to afford, to be able to own, to be able to acquire properties, to build housing, to develop and invest in real estate, is to see this protection as a mega JV deal. Now, an unusual real estate joint venture deal, but which is intentionally flipped around to work in the reverse order of the typical real estate market. Now, while the typical real estate market is all about profit, it's all about ROI, returns and revenue, this JV deal is more about keeping that profit-seeking incentive, keeping it down, and putting affordability, accessibility, and equity within the reach of average citizens. And yes, we know that real estate will always appreciate, will always have returns. And so in cases where profit making is necessary and even otherwise required, we then capture such profits and reinvest it back into this same JV, into this same protection framework that we're about to explore. So this protection framework, this protection instrument basically separates the land from the soil. It separates the value of the land from the soil and also separates the value of the building from such land, such that when the land is appreciating, it can capture, use, or control such appreciation without necessarily driving up or influencing the cost of housing that sits on it. And while the cost of housing or the value of the housing that sits on it also appreciates, captures such value without any further implications to the land that it sits on. And it achieves all of this just by flipping around how we own land, how we build and how we develop. And of course, I know that we cannot change the land use act, we cannot change how government or how the constitution allows, recognizes, or governs land administration. We can't change how approval is done. We cannot change approval standards. But then we can redefine, we can creatively change how we buy land, how titles, documentations, land rights are captured, recognized, recorded, and documented. We can simplify how the value of land and the value of property is measured. We also simplify the roles and responsibilities of government agencies, compliance agencies, and how their roles influence or determine or affect land administration and even housing development. And this brings me to the three instruments that to achieve all of these creativity and simplification that I mentioned, we use cooperatives, co-ownerships, and land trusts. And I chose just these three because thankfully we already have existing informal structures in age groups, traditional groups, religious affiliation, and a parallel informal real estate market that we are all familiar with. So with all of these structures already existing and expressed through WhatsApp groups, Esusu groups, Ajo groups, age groups, and so on, it then becomes easy to leverage these three frameworks and layer them on these our informal systems to democratize access, to democratize urban equity, to promote inclusivity, to unlock economic stability, and even democratize wealth creation and wealth retention across multiple generations of the urban masses. So let's start with co-ownership, because it is the one where individuals and small groups of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 can easily leverage. So this is the one that you and your friends can easily key into and leverage to access affordable housing, especially in a city like Lagos. Now, co-ownership is not new. Our forefathers have co-owned properties because co-ownership simply means 2, 3, 4, 5, 1 million, 1,000 people sharing ownership of something. Hence, co-ownership. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of ads and even applications inviting you to come co-own a piece of property, a 2-bedroom, a 5-bedroom, a studio apartment with 3 or 4 or 5 other people, so that you can make revenue, so that you can make rent on such property. Now, what that does is effectively reduce the burden of ownership. The cost of investment is reduced on only you by splitting it between 3, 4, or 5 other people that co-own that property, and which qualifies you at the end of the day to get the returns, to get the revenue, the rent that such property generates. So that kind of co-ownership is for profit making. It's built for financial returns. But this co-ownership, this fractional co-ownership that I'm talking about, is the type that is built on real title ownership, real land ownership. So instead of 5 people owning a bungalow or owning a 2-bedroom apartment, the 5 people individually own their own piece of land that they can use independently, build at their own pace, on their own budget, and at their convenience whenever they are ready. So for the other type, the company already develops it and then invites you to come and acquire it by splitting the cost with other people. In this case, the script is flipped around such that you can buy the land instead of waiting for the building to be built. Instead of waiting for such apartment to be developed, you split the ownership, the cost of acquisition of the land with 3, 4, 5, 6, or 10 or 20 people, depending on the size of the land, depending on what government says can be built on such land, depending on your budget and what you intend to achieve with such project. So this gives you the flexibility, the autonomy, total control to use such land for whatever you desire to use it for, simply by splitting the cost of ownership with other people. So this model works on the philosophy that if you can own land, it's easy for you to build, you can be creative and supplement your cost. You can either use housing, it's easy to then build once you've had land. So instead of going to the city outskirts where there are no infrastructure, where you still have to put up with the cost of transportation, sit in traffic all day, lose productive hours, you can then use this model to access prime land in prime locations on a decent budget simply by splitting it with other people. And with the flexibility and autonomy that it provides, you can build it at your own time, at your own pace, on your own budget, to your own taste, whenever you are ready. And to simplify this, just assume or imagine it as a terrace apartment. Typical real estate developers build terraces and then they sell each terrace units to different people. Now imagine that before that terrace is built, you are buying the land that terrace will sit on, without worrying about what other people will build or how other people use their own portion. So what this effectively solves is the burden of upfront cost, that initial 450 million, 300 million that you do not have to drop at once for a developer for a completed building, or that 50 million, 60 million, 80 million for a plot of land. And all you have to do is simply split that 80 million, 100 million, 50, 40 million for the land into 5, into 6, into 10 places. Pay for one and other people pay the rest. And you can use that fraction that you paid for to build your own home whenever you're ready. This model is so flexible that whether it's 4 or 5 people sharing one plot, or 20 to 100 people using bigger land sizes, and makes it easy for individuals, for small groups, or even large organizations with high staff number to leverage and key into property ownership as it fits their income, as it fits their budget. I reckon that at this point, you're wondering, people already buy quarter plots, so how is this different? I'm going to be splitting a plot with 4 people. How is this different from if I just go and buy a quarter plot? So, up until recently, most quarter plots half plot transactions are done informally. That is, they are done without recognizable title, and all that the seller and the buyers will simply get a lawyer to legalize the transaction without any government involvement. Now, there is no problem with that. I mean, informality has been in our way of life from. However, the implication of not having that government-backed title is that you cannot use it to unlock or access some benefits. So when it comes to using such property as collateral, those documents do not suffice. But let's put the issue of title and documentation aside for a while and just look at the implication of getting roads to the lot, to the quarter plot that is sitting at the back. Because yes, it's easy to cut for the ones in front, but for the quarter plots that are at the back, because by the time you divide your plots into 4, those ones that are sitting at the back need roads. So what you eventually do is waste land in creating roads for those at the back. And apart from this, by the time you've removed all of that road, the remaining land is not sizable enough to get approval for such property. So while quarter plots already exist in the parallel informal market, this on the other hand, this co-ownership model on the other hand, solves the title and documentation issues. Remember that our focus here is still urban equity, and that means that title and documentation must be such that can be leveraged for access, for equity, for financial access and financial inclusion in the long run. So titling and documentation in this case follows the formal real estate procedure. Then apart from that, remember that earlier I referenced the terraced development model. So as opposed to the traditional way of just splitting the land into 4 ways, what we do here is first remove the setback and then split whatever is left evenly into equal fractions for the number of co-owners that are interested in such property. And what this achieves is effectively make the development able to obtain approval. Because with your name on the title and the government giving you the go-ahead to build what you intend to build, that qualifies you, that gives you the foothold to build at your own pace, at the convenience of your income, and as it fits your taste. So basically, 5 co-owners mean 1 plot, 1 title, 1 approval, but 5 homes, 5 different homes, sharing a single driveway, sharing the same car park, sharing the same facilities. I mean, they can decide to contribute money together to collectively and jointly erect their gate, erect their fence, erect water storage, provide security, interlock the compound, all of which, if you had bought a single quarter plot, you will do all by yourself. So the cost sharing here is not only for acquisition, it's not only about buying the land alone. You also split the cost of doing design, you split the cost of obtaining approval, you also split the cost of making the compound, of making the property livable, even though individual housing units are individually built and erected on personal budgets and to personal individual tastes. And interestingly, for cities like Lagos, this co-ownership model can be structured for vertical ownership for different people with different budget sizes. Okay, I guess at this point, I must acknowledge the fact that the reason all of this looks smooth, easy, convenient, and breezy to me is because I've interacted with this. I'm an architect. The technicality of this is second nature to me. So I acknowledge the fact that this is a bit technical. And to really unlock and enjoy this, to really leverage and key into this, you need the help. You need architects and engineers to hold your hands through the process. But what gives me the extra confidence is the fact that this works already. I mean, I put my money where my mouth is. My team and I have already built a platform that simplifies this process and helps you key into this, starting with Lagos. So if this interests you, maybe you have a group of 4 or 5 friends, or a team of 5 to 10 people, or maybe your company is interested in incorporating housing as staff welfare package and would like to explore this, you would like to take advantage of this, just drop a comment down below. Simply type GUIDE or send an email and a teammate will reach out to you and we'll take it up from there. But let's continue to the remaining 2. Okay, if you remember, I said that the main thing that makes these 3 instruments that I mentioned, one of which is ownership that I already discussed, what makes it applicable for Lagos, for Abuja, for Nigerian economy, for the Nigerian housing market, what makes it appropriate to be able to help us protect Nigerians from this speculative profit-seeking real estate model is the fact that what makes this instrument functional is deeply anchored in our way of life, in our traditions, and how we interact with one another. The remaining 2 align more with social capital, with communal living, and creative ways of augmenting or finding finance for property development. And since I have spent so much time discussing or explaining co-ownership, I will simply just create analogies and scenarios that can help us understand these 2 concepts and how they work quickly. So let's start by imagining that you belong to a 20-member cooperative society. Okay? You belong to a cooperative society that has 20 members. And the 20 of you have been contributing for housing. Your total contribution is not yet enough to build 20 houses for 20 people. But you have all decided, you have all come together and decided that you want to achieve housing. So what do you do? And before we get into it, remember again that our focus is to keep housing, no matter how affordable, no matter how accessible, and no matter how much influence the parallel informal real estate market has on this housing, we must keep it bankable, we must keep it legal, we must keep it credit worthy. And so the remaining 2 solutions, it says, what you do in this case is you use the money you have to generate the complete money that you don't have. And so let's get into how this works. So the first one, that is a land readjustment system, says buy land but don't build all. Break it into sections. And in its first section, build compactly where everybody is going to live. And then use the rest for other commercial purposes, other agricultural purposes, other purposes that complement living and livelihood, the lifestyle of the people in that environment. And this model is not strange. This is what we've seen around us. We've seen people do farming estates where you live in the same estate. On one section, you have houses. On one section, you have farms. On the other side, you have commercial purposes. So say, for example, you buy 5 acres. You use 1 for residential, another 1 for locked up shops to make money, 2 for farms where you plant food, you grow flowers, you grow food for members of the community and even for sale, and the other 1 for future development. So this kind of development is just a way that, okay, you have some money, but it's not enough to develop. And so instead of waiting or looking for money that you cannot get, you use what you have to get what you want. So you build up a part and you use the rest of the property to create activities that generate money, that generate revenue for you to develop and complete the rest. So let's even assume that because you don't have enough to complete all the housing for 20 people, you start building in phases. By the time the other activities start generating revenue, you can then complete that housing for all the members of the group. So that is one called land readjustment. But the other one says, what if the members of the group already have land? So you're already contributing money, and say about 70% of that group, 14 people out of that 20 already have land. Irrespective of where the location of the land is, everybody comes together and collectively agree and decide on the basis of which area is better for living, which area is better for commercial, which area is better for agriculture or whatever use you want to have, and which area makes better money, which area has better resale value. And so you sell that part that has better resale value and use it to develop the part that will generate money, the part that has commercial value, that when you build locked up shops, people will rent and you can make money, which you can then use to build the part that you've intended for residential. That is called a land pool. The fact that everybody submits their land, irrespective of location, irrespective of economic value, and you throw it back into the pool for every member of the society, every member of the cooperative to collectively harness, to collectively leverage, to collectively monetize, to collectively develop and use for affordable housing, even for income generation. So these two alternatives are easy instruments that our cooperative societies, we already have a lot of cooperatives, a lot of housing cooperatives, a lot of microfinance cooperatives that are already existing, that already have the trust that either of these methods need to thrive. Because as sweet and as fancy as this English and explanation sounds, as this scenario sounds, without trust, none of this is going to work. Yes, there are issues that comes as a result of human nature. People will have different expectations. People have different economic realities. All fingers are not equal. People have different life goals. And so because of that, it may be difficult to harmonize all of these expectations, all of these realities. But once trust is present, once you've broken that barrier of trust, it becomes easy for everybody to come together and create a path forward. And thankfully, since all these our informal society, social groups, Ajo, Esusu, and all of these mediums already exist, it's easy for us to plug and play into our traditional real estate models to maximize the opportunities for those that do not have the means without to compete with the typical real estate model, the masses, the middle income, the small business owners, the average Nigerians that just want a roof over their head. This is how land pool and land readjustment can help us protect land ownership, can help us protect the city real estate and keep it accessible for the urban masses, such that while prices keep flying here and there every day, keep soaring high every minute, the cooperative societies can help their members, can keep prices stable for members of their societies. And even in cases where members would rather sell their properties because of an emergency, because of an urgent need for cash, the cooperative can cushion that effect, keep the property within the pool, and then help them augment those needs by sourcing or providing such emergency funds so that their members do not lose their properties. And this brings us to the third one, which is land trust. Because yes, we are protecting everybody against speculation, against the reality or the effect of land appreciation, which traditionally translates to increase in the cost of housing or increase in the cost of rent. But because the reality is that land prices will appreciate, and we cannot allow this appreciation to go to waste. This is why such cooperatives will set up a land trust that its main function is to isolate land from whatever it is used for. So even when we have buildings on land, the value of the building is different from the value of the land, such that if suddenly the area gets new infrastructure, that sudden appreciation in the value of the land can be captured and used by the trust while keeping the housing on top of it affordable for the members. Now, unfortunately, because our digital land administration system is not yet fully functional, yes, Lagos is waking up, but because it will take time for this to translate, I will not go into how such value is converted. However, the point remains that this sudden appreciation because the land is beside Dangote refinery, and as a result, the value suddenly shoots up, which traditionally should increase the cost of housing that sits on it. The trust absorbs that appreciation and uses it because it has detached the value of the land from the value of the house. But all of this cannot happen if we do not have proper digitization, proper documentation, proper approval, proper record keeping, and proper documentation of such assets and such property, which helps the trust to disassociate such land from whatever it is on it. This may sound technical, but land trust is just like a formal land trust, is just like the bridge, like the intersection of standard real estate practice and housing cooperative system. And its whole purpose is to protect members from this sudden surge in land appreciation so that it does not translate to higher or more expensive housing prices or more rental prices for the residents. So let me add quickly that whether cooperative, co-ownership, or land trust, they are not exclusive. They can be combined or used interchangeably. For example, a cooperative society can create a land trust and the properties on it can be built incrementally using the fractional co-ownership model. So let's bring this home. Like I said, all of these are supposed to be the responsibilities and the roles of the government. But in cases where recent development has proven to us that the government is not yet interested in protecting or looking out for its urban masses, for the common man, for small business owners, for average salary earners, then the responsibility is on us, individuals, private societies, private organizations, NGOs, and private individuals to look out for ourselves. If we don't protect the right and privilege of the common masses of average and middle income class to access land, their right and privilege to affordable housing, their right and privilege to urban equity, We will effectively lock out the middle class and the low income class from accessing property ownership while keeping it all alone for the haves and the rich. So while all of these instruments that I've discussed still have certain loopholes and challenges that are as a result of basic human nature, with proper structure, proper legal structure, and governance frameworks that guides and controls members, beneficiaries, and participants, we can leverage these systems and maximize their advantages to the benefits of the people. So, we cannot keep waiting for the government, especially when the government profits more, when the real estate market, when the housing market works only for the rich. We must at all costs ensure that the middle class, the low income class can still access property ownership without sacrificing quality of life, without having to work in BI and living in Ibadan, even without supporting infrastructure to make that possible. And we must act now. And like always, if you need further clarifications, do not hesitate to engage. Send a DM, drop a comment, or shoot me an email, and I'll be glad to help. And I hope this helps.